The death of Jaime Zapata, an immigration and customs enforcement agent shot by a suspected drug cartel hitman in Mexico, opens questions towards the course joint collaboration between Mexico and the United States might take. Ana María Salazar, Executive Director, Mexico Weekly, and former Pentagon and White House official, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you, Gabi.
We would like your opinion on how will this recent attack on U.S. agents in Mexico affect the bilateral ties?
Well, it's still to be seen. I think what we need to see happen in terms when I think of this from the media's perspective and from the analysts as an analyst is a couple of things. One, what will be the role of the Mexican government in being able to apprehend the people who were behind this attacks? If it takes a very long time, I think it will be perceived in the United States as a sign of one, weakness in terms of not being able to arrest what is considered to be assassins in a high impact case. And two, it may be seen as not having the political will to go after these organized crime hitmen. So I think the first thing we need to look at is one, how long it takes the Mexican government to arrest these people, and two, it'll be interesting to see the reactions from Mexico in terms of the United States is going to be pushing very hard to find these assassins and make sure they're prosecuted in the United States. And there's already been comments made by Mexican legislators that they perceive this to be an interference and attack on Mexican sovereignty. And third, what is going to be very important is that another type of assassination where you have U.S. law enforcement officials or U.S. officials involved does not happen again, because that, I think, would also create even more tensions in the bilateral relationship.
Will there need to be new restrictions on agents' movements while working in Mexico?
Well, I think there already is a lot of restrictions for at least U.S. officials. I don't know, if you read the warnings that are issued by the U.S. government, they're very strong in the sense that they order U.S. officials not to move around in certain states, particularly in certain cities in the northern part of the country. And also the warnings goes for U.S. Citizens. Now these warnings, and I know there's been a lot of complaints by governors and local officials that these warnings are unfair, but I have to say, there's a lot of governments around the world that are issuing warnings for their citizens not to be moving around and not traveling to certain parts of Mexico. So I'm sure there's going to be some more restrictions being implemented. And I'm sure some parts of the country they're going to be requesting that the family members of these U.S. officials leave Mexico. They've already done it, for example, in the city of Monterrey. So I'm sure we're going to be seeing more restrictions.
The U.S. Law enforcement officers who work in Mexico are not allowed to be armed, to carry guns in our country.
Yeah, no, and there's going to be a lot of pressure, particularly from the U.S. Congress, to seek that at least law enforcement officials be allowed to carry some types of weapons. I don't think the Mexican government, and particularly the Mexican legislature, will allow that. There's just two very different views as to who and how many people should be carrying guns in Mexico. It's very, very different than in the United States with the Second Amendment, which is much more liberal, and basically everybody, almost anybody in the United States can carry a gun. It's very, very different in Mexico, and I don't think there's going to be very many changes in that sense.
And security at the U.S.-Mexico border, we know it has been a long political issue. How does this event change the perspective that the U.S. government has about the problem?
I don't know if it changes dramatically, because I think there already is a lot of concern as to what's going on in Mexico. I mean, we should remind your audience that there was a couple of U.S. officials that were killed in Ciudad Juarez already. They were assassinated in Ciudad Juarez. A particular woman who had her 7-month-old baby in the car. She was with her husband. They were both murdered. Another official was also that same day killed in Juarez. I think there's already a lot of concerns. I think what we should be watching very carefully as events unfold, that if there's more assassinations, high-impact assassinations, including law enforcement officials or U.S. officials in Mexico, I think that could deteriorate the relationship even more. generally speaking, it doesn't appear that Americans or foreigners in general have been targeted by the cartels, which I think is very, very important to point out. But there continues to be a lot of concern that the violence in Mexico somehow is going to there's going to be some kind of contagion into the United States, and that there's going to be more American cities on the U.S. border that are going to feel the effect of the violence by these cartels.
Will the U.S. government increase at some time its efforts to combat the drug cartels in Mexico?
I don't know how it's going to change. I think what we're going to see is, in many ways, a very similar strategy, in the sense that the U.S. will continue to provide assistance, support, and probably there's going to be a lot of exchange of information as to what the United States knows and provides to the Mexican government. Whether there is going to be a dramatic change in terms of, for example, a reduction in consumption of drugs in the United States, which would have some impact in Mexico, I don't think so in the short term. In the long term, there has been some changes. There's less cocaine consumption. The other issue, of course, is arms trafficking, and whether there's going to be a dramatic change in that. There's some steps that are being taken by the U.S. government, but it's perceived not to be enough by the Mexican government. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about that.
I was going right there about the arms issue on my next question. Does this attack have any impact on the U.S. Congress actions? Would they refuse to legislate reforms that would make it more difficult for arms traffickers to send guns to our country?
You know, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, I think even before this assassination took place of this ICE agent, the attack on the 2 ICE agents, I think even before that, there was very little probability of any important reforms in gun controls in the United States, mainly because the lower Congress, there was important change in the lower Congress. It became Republican in the last elections in November. And so Barack Obama only controls the Senate, and gun control in the United States is a very, very difficult issue, especially for legislators. It's very volatile, and it takes away votes. So I think even before these 2 ICE agents were attacked, there was just very little probability of any reforms being discussed in the U.S. Congress.
And also, it's inevitably comparisons are being drawn with the case of the special DEA agent Enrique Camarena, who was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in Mexico in 1985. Are there any similarities?
I don't think there's that many similarities, because we got to remind you said it very well. He was kidnapped, he was tortured, and he was murdered by people who were linked to the Mexican government. And I think that's a very, very important difference. I don't think there is any way or any information that would lead us to think that there's any government official that is linked to the assassination of these ICE agents, which I think is very important. And the second thing is I have a sense that there is the will or the interest to try to find the people who did this and take them to justice. I mean, the issue is going to be where they're going to be tried, in Mexico or the United States. And I think that's going to create some frictions. But I do think there are big, big differences.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your vision with us, Ana María Salazar. Thank you in behalf of Uno Noticias.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I hope I can come back.
Of course, pleased to have you here.
Thank you.